For more on what to expect at the 92nd Academy Awards, let's bring in our panel. Joining us from Los Angeles is Jamaal Finkley, CEO and executive producer of BlackTree Television. With us here in Washington, Imani Cheers is an associate professor of digital storytelling at the George Washington University. From New York, Max Alvarez is a film historian, author, and instructor. Also joining us from New York, Wilson Morales is a film critic and co-founder of the Black Film Critics Circle. Thank you to all of you for joining us. Max, let me start with you. What do you make of this year's nominations? Do you believe they are a fair reflection of the best that Hollywood has to give us this year?
You're asking what's always the most controversial political question of the year, because the biggest point of debate is what was overlooked. Certain films we expected to be nominated didn't make it. It's certainly a very eclectic mix, from a mega-budget movie like The Irishman to even a Korean import like Parasite. But as always, there are some films that got overlooked, and Todd Haynes' Dark Waters and Terrence Malick's A Hidden Life. So we can always take issue with what got overlooked, but it's definitely an eclectic mix.
Jamaal, do you think there are any notable omissions?
Yeah, I mean, definitely when we see the award season, there's been talk about diversity, and it's great that Parasite's in there. But when you look at the lead actress, I'm very shocked that Awkwafina didn't get nominated for Farewell, which I thought she did a tremendous job in taking a lot of worldwide moviegoers into a Chinese American and a Chinese household. And I thought that was a big snub this year.
Okay.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'd also love to shout out Lupita Nyong'o's performance in Us was absolutely phenomenal. The fact that she wasn't acknowledged is truly a travesty.
Okay, well, we've got to include Wilson in this. Wilson, what do you think were the notable omissions?
I think, you know, when you get these films, and this was really a competitive year this year. You had a legitimate 15 films. You've got 9. The Oscars haven't gone 10 films in years. My colleagues mentioned, Lupita, Awkwafina. You've got Adam Sandler for Uncut Gems. Eddie Murphy, obviously, for Dolomite Is My Name. Jennifer Lopez was a big omission for The Hustlers. People thought that she would be going in. A lot of Oscar prediction sites had her in, but you know, you get these every year. There's always 1 to 5 big omissions, and it's a question. Then you start talking about, like, what does the Academy need to do? And I guess when you have a lack of diversity, you only have 5 black nominees total this year compared to the over 10 you had last year. But you know, Parasite's in there as well, so it takes away a little bit of the talk, but nevertheless, at the end of the day, you know, when you see Cynthia Erivo will be nominated, that's great. Lupita could have been nominated, but the Academy doesn't tend to fare horror genres farewell, with the exception of maybe Kathy Bates when she won for Misery.
Jamaal, on that diversity issue that Wilson talks about, I mean, once again, the Academy has come under criticism for its lack of diversity. If we look at the number of black nominees, it's hit a 3-year low. Only 5 black people were nominated for Oscars this year. That's down from 15 in 2019, 13 in 2018, and 18 in 2017. Let's listen to what the actor Joaquin Phoenix had to say at the recent BAFTA Awards in London. Let's watch this.
I think that we send a very clear message to people of color that you're not welcome here. I think that's the message that we're sending to people that have contributed so much to our medium and our industry, and in ways that we benefit from. I don't think anybody wants a handout or preferential treatment, although that's what we give ourselves every year. I think that people just want to be acknowledged and appreciated and respected for their work. This is not a self-righteous condemnation, because I'm ashamed to say that I'm part of the problem.
So, Jamaal, what do you make of what Joaquin Phoenix had to say there? Can the Academy do better?
Yes, the Academy could do better. I mean, and they've made strides over the years to include more members in the Academy of diverse backgrounds, and that's going to help other films get acknowledged. I mean, we don't know if Parasite would have been acknowledged if there weren't more diverse members this year. But I mean, the Academy could always do better, and it goes from the actors to behind the screen, the writers, the producers. It's just a diverse number of people that needs to be employed on these projects also, so that when you look through that crowd of people cheering for their movie, you see more than, you see a diverse crowd in there also. So definitely, everybody's been cheering on Joaquin. I think it was a bold and brave statement he made at the BAFTAs, and I hope people are going to take notice.
Wilton, this is such a controversial issue. You know, people have their own views in it. We heard the view of the novelist Stephen King. He came under fire when he took to Twitter, and this is what he said on Twitter. He said, "I would never consider diversity in matters of art, only quality. It seems to me that to do otherwise would be wrong." He also said, in essence, that those judging creative excellence should be blind to questions of race, gender, and sexual orientation. He backpedaled a little later in the Washington Post, and he did admit that the Oscars are, in his words, rigged in favor of white people. But it gets back to what Joaquin Phoenix said. You know, you don't want handouts, but you want fairness. Why are these questions so polarizing?
You know, I spoke to Viola Davis the day of the nominations. The one thing she said, it's all about volume. You know, at the end of the day, you know, we need to have, before we even talk about the Oscar nominations or get to that point, we need to have volume. We need to have more people of color, more diversity in certain key roles that people will be able to look at. You know, Cynthia Erivo's only the 12th black actress to be nominated for Best Actress, you know, in 92 years. You know, and that's because you're not getting enough producers and directing, hiring black actresses to be in these key roles, to be in these films, to be shown at the time period during the Oscar campaign. So when you're seeing these movies play out in the beginning of the year, they're not thought of after October. So we need to have more films of color, of diversity in that sort of realm between September and December, so that there's a volume of choices as opposed to one or two, so that they can be in the conversation. Because by the time we get to the Oscar voting, you know, you're looking at maybe one or two people as opposed to like 10 or 12, you know, and then, you know, it also goes to the marketing. At the end of the day, you know, 2 years ago when we knew Scorsese was going to do The Irishman, we already knew that was going to be an Oscar nominee. It's a question of not whether it's good enough to win it all. For those who are not, who don't have that exposure internationally, they have to work harder to get people to look at their films, to be talked about, to be written about, to be in the conversation.
Imani, what do you make of that point that there needs to be more volume? There needs to be more black actors and actresses in order for there to be more diversity?
Yeah, well, I just want to point out that earlier this week, Wednesday, I believe, Essence Magazine had their annual event, Black Women in Hollywood. And you had a full display of the breadth of writers, directors, producers, actresses. And one of the feedbacks and the comments that are often made were yes, we need to have more people at the table, but also you need to have more funding for these stories to be told.
Right.
So it's one thing to say, and my colleagues I'm sure know very well, that Oscar campaigning is expensive. It is exhausting. And it's one of those things that, yes, we need to have more people and set things between September and December, but just what it takes to run a successful Oscar campaign is oftentimes out of reach for a number of minority voices in Hollywood. So there's, yes, films being made. There was another film that was not, we haven't even mentioned it, The Last Black Man in San Francisco, which I saw recently, which is a beautiful film that the numbers and, you know, whether it be international release or even domestic releases, the number of theaters that these films are going to get in, we need to provide more of a pipeline of financial support for writers and directors and producers of color to share the stories that are really important for these communities.
Right, Max, what's your view on that?
She makes such an important point about the marketing and the expensive marketing, because we can't take too lightly the amount of money that is spent on these Oscar campaigns. And one can only think, well, if a studio or a major distributor had actually thrown its Oscar campaign weight behind a certain performer, the situation could have been much different. It is a very, very expensive project, and so much of what we end up seeing nominated is based on this massive marketing campaign that the distributors and the studios do to the Oscar voters.
Right.
So it boils down to money, unfortunately.
Imani, we talk about diversity in terms of people of color being included. There's also women. I mean, if we look this year, a big omission, no women in the Best Director category. The actress and director Olivia Wilde, she was asked about this and what the Academy should do. This is what she said.
The Academy could do a lot to help. I mean, obviously, when they nominate a movie for Best Picture, but not the director, it begs the question, are they sort of discounting the amount of effort and dedication and thought that went into that? You know, Greta Gerwig deserved a nomination. I think Alma Harrell deserved a nomination. I think Lulu Wang deserved a nomination. There's so many women this year who created these extraordinary movies. So in many ways, I think it's a brilliant year for female filmmakers. My favorite movies of the year that did very well, directed by women, but the Academy, in many ways, is still very old-fashioned.
She mentioned Greta Gerwig, her movie Little Women. It's up for Best Picture, but she wasn't nominated for Best Director.
It's also up for a number of other awards.
Right, it is, yeah. But if you look at last year, 12% of the 100 top-grossing movies were directed by women. Another thing that Olivia Wilde said there is that the Academy is old-fashioned and things take a while to change. Does it have to be that way?
It doesn't have to be.
Yeah.
We're 92 years into this this awards program, and the reality, as my colleagues mentioned, whether it be Cynthia Erivo being the 12th, right, Black woman to be nominated in an actress category, and it's incredibly infuriating to myself and millions of other women, who, not only from a perspective of just film, appreciation, but also people who, like myself, who we study this industry and we work in this industry. And it's the reality that, as Issa Rae said it, congratulations to all the men. Like, the fact that Greta Gerwig was not nominated, the fact that Lulu Wang was not nominated is not only offensive, but it's just sexist. And it's one of these things where we have been talking about Oscars So White, that hashtag that was created years ago, and we're still having these same conversations. As you mentioned in the opening, the number of minorities, people of color, African Americans, Asians, women, Latinas is consistently dwindling. So we had this conversation. They opened up the pool of voters, and then still at the same time, as I previously mentioned, with the financing that comes in, we're still not seeing any change. So we know that there's a problem. It's been acknowledged that there's a problem, and then there's been very, very, very slow moving to make any sort of difference. And we see this, unfortunately, not just with the Oscars. We can talk about the Emmys. We can talk about the Grammys. Like, we can go on and on. In all fairness, about the way in which women and people of color are snubbed when it comes to these awards moments.
Yeah. Jamaal, there seems to be the will on the part of the Academy. It wants to change the status quo by trying to change the makeup of its predominantly white male membership, as Wilson pointed out earlier on. But is that enough?
No, it's not enough. I mean, they spoke, my colleague spoke about the campaigns, and Wilson spoke about Lupita and Nyong'o. And when you look at some of these nominees, they didn't have the strength of the campaign behind them. I think there's still an awareness that the Academy members that are there needs to take into account that we have to be fair on all sides. It's not just about equal pay. It's not just about Me Too. It's about letting all of these people into the fold, and it's behind the camera, it's in the boardroom, it's in front of the camera. It's not just, there's a whole process to making these movies. A lot of people a lot of moviegoers look at these movies and just see the actor and consider the director, but all these elements that make these movies, if there was diversity in all of these elements, I think we would see bigger changes within the voting.
Yeah, and inclusion, I think, is the most important aspect of that. As he just mentioned, like, you have to make sure that it's from the production assistants all the way to the top, to the financiers, and those are the facts where we're not seeing that inclusion, right? I love and I sort of cringe with the overuse of the word diversity because it's also about inclusion. Like, you have to make sure that you're bringing a wide perspective of voices to these mega productions. You're talking hundreds of people.
That's right. Yeah. All right, I want to move on to the movies. Max, let's take a look at Parasite. It's a dark comedy from South Korea. It's already received some accolades. This is what the Korean actor Lee Sun-kyun had to say. Let's listen.
일단 제가 너무 감사드리고요.
First of all, thank you so much. I'm a little embarrassed, feeling like we're the parasites of Hollywood now. I think, hopefully, with this opportunity and with the success of Parasite, various industries, film industries across the world, can coexist.
Max, just one question. Parasite is in contention for Best Picture, but there's also a category called Best Foreign Movie category. I mean, should there be that category? Why not, make a decision or judge all movies on just their merits, no matter where it's made or who makes it?
Well, we have to remember the Academy Awards originally were conceived to celebrate the achievements of the U.S. motion picture industry. And it was only as a gesture that the foreign film category was eventually introduced. It was basically designed to celebrate people working in Hollywood studios. I personally would love seeing the category change to world language cinema instead of foreign film. But it is fascinating that this was nominated in two different categories, as you say. And I would love to know more about behind-the-scenes marketing of Parasite, because these days, as I indicated earlier, with Oscar campaigns, a distributor has to spend so much money to get people just to talk about a film. And Parasite did become a phenomenon. And it could be the fact that the Academy has a more international membership now that benefited Parasite when it came to a Best Picture nomination. So it's fascinating that it ended up in these two categories. But I do believe that international cinema should be recognized, and I think an Academy Award recognition for a film made in another country is very important at urging people to seek out movies beyond Hollywood's.
Yeah, talking about other countries, Wilson, in terms of growth in the industry here in the United States, has the industry here reached something of a saturation point? Is it becoming very difficult for the industry to grow its audience? And does it need to look further afield, China being a case in point? I mean, China does allow a limited number of Hollywood releases in the country. How does Hollywood change that?
Well, you figure, when you look at what's been happening in the last 10 years, Disney, through its acquisition of Marvel and Star Wars and now Fox, they've pretty much taken over the entire market. Most of their films are generating $1 billion. Most of their films are being seen overseas, specifically in China. And since China only brings in, I guess, less than 20 films per year from America, they're looking at blockbuster movies. Obviously they want to bring in a film that's going to bring in big numbers. And for the movies that they do bring in, it does help out those films. I think for a film like maybe like The Farewell, which is now, I think, getting a China release. Anything small, it begs the question of whether or not there's going to be an audience to see it. And, China, any of these movies that gross over $500 million is because of China. China is providing a platform for these movies to gross so much money that it helps with the marketing. It helps make more money. It doesn't really give a lot of films that are not part of that equation the chance to make up. And only with the exception of Black Panther 2 years ago, which was just probably the only film that grossed more money domestically than internationally.
Just on that point, you mentioned the movie The Farewell, and here we have a movie that seems to have been tailored for the Chinese audience.
Yeah, here's the thing about The Farewell. Played at Sundance. I like to believe that Sundance movies are not meant to make $100 million. They're meant to be seen, and the win is to get into Sundance. The win is for the director, the talent that's being discovered, and the story. And that's a film that played throughout the year, got a lot of good notices. Lula Wan, it gave Awkwafina a bigger visibility area because people just mostly knew her as a comedian, but now they saw her as an actress. And that was the win there. But the story sold. The story was a universal story, and it sold over well. it played well. I don't know about the numbers. It didn't do like $50 million, but it played well enough. Sometimes you get these Oscar-nominated movies that are not about money. Spotlight was a film that won Best Picture, but it was not a $100 million movie. It was just about the story.
Right.
And you know, when you have The Farewell, it's all about the marketing. Because you can have a good story. Now you just have to sell it, whether it be in magazines, online articles, radio. And like I said, it takes the producers and the studio behind it to put some effort in terms of selling that story and selling its cast members in front and behind the screen.
Imani, it certainly generated a lot of interest, The Farewell.
Absolutely. It generated a lot of interest. It didn't necessarily, there was a Variety article that I was reading up on, and unfortunately it was considered a flop in China. It didn't resonate, unfortunately, with Chinese viewers the way in which it was predicted to do so, despite being a phenomenal story, as my colleague just mentioned, and Awkwafina being, you know, really seen as a true dramatic actress instead of just the comedian that she was when we saw her in Crazy Rich Asians, right? That was our first time really seeing her on that global screen. So no, it was one of those things where, and I think right now trying to figure out how a film with a predominantly Asian, predominantly Chinese cast, a Chinese story, wasn't able to resonate and connect is something where people are trying to figure out how that disconnect occurred and why it was seen more of an American story, unfortunately, when there were only two actually American actors in the entire film.
Imani, the other thing is there is there's considerable concern in the industry right now in China because of the recent coronavirus outbreak.
Absolutely.
This is the most lucrative time in China for the movie industry.
When they shut down the Lunar New Year,
you're right.
that was it.
Yeah. That was devastating.
It was devastating for everyone, and it still is. I think we saw that there are a number of U.S. films that were going to be released over the last month, like mid-January to now, that either have canceled their releases or they pushed them considerably further back, and that's something that we're seeing because of the global pandemic that is that coronavirus.
Jamaal, could that have a longer-term impact?
It can. I mean, when you look at China and I mean, America has 40,000 screens. China has 70,000 screens, and the population there. I think once this virus, and we've been through these pandemics before with different, whether it's Ebola or what have you, we'll get through it. And I think when we're on the other side of it, we'll see the Chinese market increase again. When you look at the first half of this year, the Chinese market was in the red till the animation Nezha was released and did $700 million and started to bring it out the red. So I think even with the slow start of the year, we'll be back with a strong Chinese market by the end of the year.
Just one other point on China, Imani, and that is just 2 American movies were among the top 10 grosses in China last year. In fact, the Washington Post had a headline. That's from Variety, by the way. The Washington Post headline said, "The Chinese film industry is doing the unthinkable, thriving without Hollywood." What does that tell us about the Chinese industry?
I think it tells us that there are diverse perspectives. I think they're telling us that the Chinese market is thirsty for Chinese stories and not just pulling from, as my colleague mentioned with Black Panther being huge, but even films, you know, other Disney films, other Marvel films. Nasdaq, as you just mentioned, it's $721 million. There's surpassing Zootopia, which was originally the largest grossing Pixar film. And it's just one of those really phenomenal things that we're seeing is that there's a thirst for not only genuine stories, but we're just seeing, I think, diversity in these markets.
I got 15 seconds. Sorry, Matt. I got 15 seconds. I've got to go around the table very quickly. Your guess for best movie, Imani.
Oh, my guess for best movie. No comment. I'm rooting for everybody Black.
You're gonna
There's 4 people.
Okay, Jamaal.
I'm gonna go with Parasite. I think it's gonna get it. It's a shame that So Damn Park and none of the actors were nominated along with it. But yeah.
All right,
Parasite.
Max.
I think it'll be 1917.
1917, and Wilson.
1917.
Ah, right, 2 for my 1917. We shall see. Sunday night. That's it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C. We leave you with Best Actress nominee Renee Zellweger channeling Hollywood icon Judy Garland.
Frank is great, but he is no Judy Garland.
I don't have a home. I can't even get a manager.
London would offer you a lot of money.
Talk of the town is desperate to do a deal with you.
You're saying I have to leave my children if I want to make enough money to be with my children? I would very much like to stay.
Hello everybody, I'm Anand Naidu. If you enjoy the thoughtful, engaged discussions you see on The Heat, you may also want to subscribe to our podcast. It's appropriately titled The Heat. Twice a week we take a deep dive on world headlines, talking to experts, journalists and others. It's a fresh, focused and intimate look at the issues that matter most. Whether it's the Hong Kong riots, the latest Middle East conflict or US politics, the Heat podcast gives the clear context needed to understand both what's going on and why. And what's best, we come to you. Whether you're at home or on the go, you can find the Heat podcast just about anywhere podcasts are found. Just search The Heat CGTN. Have a listen today and subscribe. Thanks.